Yes, in the end, I ruined them all. How that could have happened I don't know, but I remember it clearly. The dream flew over thousands of years and merely left me with the sensation of completeness. I only knew that I was the cause of their falling into sin. I infected with my presence a land that had been happy and innocent before my coming, like an evil virus, like an atom of plague which destroys whole kingdoms. They learned to lie, and to love lying, and to recognize its beauty. Oh, it may have been that this started innocently, in jokes, from coquetry, in the games of love, from an atom. But this atom pierced through to their hearts, and they liked it. Then sensuality arose, and sensuality begat jealousy, jealousy, cruelty. Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. But soon, very soon, the first blood was shed. They were amazed and appalled, and they began to separate and fall apart from each other. Societies began to appear, but they were banded against each other. Reproaches and accusations began. They came to know shame and made shame a virtue. The idea of honor was evolved, and each society had its own standard. They began to torture the animals, which went away into the forests and became their foes. Conflicts began about property, partitioning, individualization, about yours and mine. They began to speak different languages. They came to know suffering and to love it. They thirsted for suffering, and said that truth is only attained through suffering. And at that point they discovered science. When they became evil, they began to talk of brotherhood and humanity and to understand these conceptions for the first time. When they became criminal, they invented justice and compiled whole legal codes for its preservation, and set up the guillotine to enforce those codes. They barely remembered what they had lost and did not even want to believe that they had once been innocent and happy. They even laughed at the possibility of their former happy state and called it just a dream. They could not even imagine it in forms and images, but strangely and wonderfully enough, when they had lost all faith in past happiness and called it mere myth, they were filled with such desire to become innocent and happy again that they fell before their heart's desire like children, deified this desire, built temples, and began to worship their own idea, their own desire, at the same time being fully convinced of the impossibility of realizing it, yet admiring it with tears and bowing down to it. And if it could have been possible for them to return to that happy state which they had forfeited, and if someone had suddenly shown it to them again and asked them whether they wished to return to that, they would probably have refused. They answered me, "What if we are lying, evil and unjust? We know this, and we weep for our sins. We torment ourselves, perhaps more than our merciful judge, who shall come to judge us and whose name we do not know. But we have science, and by its aid we shall discover truth once more, but this time we shall accept it consciously. Intellect is higher than feeling. A knowledge of life is higher than life. Science will give us wisdom. Wisdom will discover laws, and the knowledge of the laws of happiness is higher than happiness itself." This is what they said, and after such words each one came to love himself best, and they could not do otherwise. Each man became so jealous for his own individuality that he tried with all his might to lower and diminish it in others, and each devoted his life to this. Slavery came, and even voluntary slavery. The weak were willing to submit to the strongest on condition that those would help them to crush others even weaker than they. Godly men appeared who approached this people with tears and told them of their pride, their loss of moderation and harmony, and their shamelessness. They were laughed to scorn or stoned. Holy blood was shed at the temple doors. But gradually men appeared who began to invent ways by which they could all be united again without each man ceasing to love himself best and yet not interfering with others, so that they could thus all live together in a harmonious society. Whole wars arose from this idea, At the same time, all the protagonists were firmly convinced that science, wisdom, and a sense of self-preservation would ultimately force man to unite in a harmonious and rational, reasonable society. Therefore, in the meantime, to hasten this cause, the wise ones tried to exterminate those they saw as foolish, who could not understand their idea, in order to prevent them from hindering its triumph. Arrogant men and sensualists appeared who demanded all or nothing. Crime came to the aid of greed, and if crime failed, suicide followed. Religions appeared with the cult of annihilation and self-destruction for the sake of eternal consolation through non-existence and nothingness. At last this people grew weary in their senseless toil, and suffering appeared on their faces, and this people proclaimed suffering beautiful, since thought lies in suffering alone. They exalted suffering in their songs. I went among them wringing my hands and shed tears for them, but I loved them perhaps more than before, when there was yet no suffering in their faces and they were so innocent and beautiful. I came to love the earth they had profaned even more than I had loved it when it was a paradise, merely because sorrow had come upon it. Alas, I always loved sorrow and suffering, but only for myself, for my own self. For them I wept, pitying them. I stretched out my hands to them, desperately blaming myself, cursing and despising myself. I told them that I was the cause of all this, I alone. That it was I who had brought corruption, disease, and deceit into their midst. I implored them to crucify me, and I taught them how to make a cross. I did not have the strength to kill myself, but I wanted to accept torture at their hands. I longed for torture, longed to have my blood spilt to the last drop in these tortures. But they only laughed at me and finally took me for a fool. They acquitted me, telling me that they had only got what they had themselves desired, and that everything which had come about had to come about. It was inevitable. Finally, they told me I was endangering them and that they would put me in a lunatic asylum if I was not silent. Then grief pierced my heart so powerfully that my heart contracted, and I felt that I should die. And then I woke up.